Chosen one, anchor your spirit to this message right now. That heaviness in your chest, that exhaustion from having to remain calm while everything around you fell apart, release it for a moment. The last 72 hours may have felt like a courtroom. Maybe someone blamed you for a situation you did not create. Perhaps people you trusted suddenly became distant, believed the wrong story, or joined the crowd against you. Or maybe you were forced to handle a painful crisis in silence while everyone watched to see whether you would break. But you did not break. The enemy has been pressing you this week for one reason. Your response revealed a level of character that your opposition could not understand. They thought your silence meant weakness. They thought your patience meant fear. They did not realize heaven was watching how you handled the pressure. And now, the same people who turned against you are being confronted by the consequences of what they believed, what they repeated, and what they helped create. This situation is shifting now. The confusion, the false accusations, and the emotional warfare are coming to an end, not because you manipulated anyone, but because you refused to become what hurt you. Think back to that moment yesterday or earlier this week, when you could have exposed everything, sent the message, or reacted in anger, but chose restraint instead. You may have thought you were losing your voice. In reality, your self-control became your evidence. You did not find this message by accident. The algorithm did not bring you here alone. Divine timing brought you to this reminder. Your behavior under pressure was not overlooked. In the next few minutes, you will receive the spiritual verdict over this situation, the truth behind why people are suddenly seeing you differently, and a declaration to help you release the need to defend yourself to everyone. Do not scroll away before the verdict. Your future self needs you to understand that one painful chapter does not define your character. The enemy has been whispering. They believe the lie, so you must be guilty. But Scripture says, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." That stillness was not surrender to injustice. It was trust the truth would outlast the noise. The pressure you felt was not punishment. It was proof that your integrity was being tested and proven. You were not the one being exposed. You were the one being revealed. What you just heard wasn't entertainment. It was confirmation. And if you're ready to go deeper, the Chosen One's blueprint will show you exactly why God separated you before birth, why the attacks came so early, and what He's unlocking in this season. You'll also get the full audiobook version and a powerful bonus, activating your prophet mantle for those carrying a prophetic fire they haven't yet learned to release. The link is waiting in the first pinned comment, but not for long, because what happened to you was not merely a social conflict, it was a revealing. The situation exposed who had only been loyal while you were useful, who celebrated you only when you were easy to control, and who turned against you the moment you refused to betray your own conscience. They thought your silence meant weakness. They mistook your restraint for fear. They assumed that because you did not fight back publicly, you had nothing to say. But heaven saw the difference between revenge and self-control. Heaven saw the words you swallowed, the messages you chose not to send, and the moments when you had to walk away just to keep anger from becoming your master. God saw that you were not silent because you were powerless. You were silent because you understood that your spirit was too valuable to be dragged into a battle designed to drain it. You could have exposed everything. You could have repeated every conversation, revealed every hidden motive, and made sure everyone knew what they had done. You could have placed every receipt on the table and invited the crowd to judge them. But something in you understood that not every truth needs to be shouted in the marketplace. Some truths are revealed by time. Some accusations collapse under the weight of their own dishonesty. Some masks fall away without your assistance. And some battles are won the moment you refuse to become like the people who wounded you. That was the first sign that the situation had not destroyed you. It had refined your authority. The fire did not consume the gold. It separated the gold from what could not remain attached to it. What felt like humiliation became purification. What felt like rejection became the hand of God removing the voices that had become too loud around your calling. Most people believe strength is proven by how loudly you respond. But there is a deeper kind of strength that does not need to perform for witnesses. It is the strength to remain clean when others are trying to make you dirty. It is the strength to keep your heart from becoming a courtroom where you rehearse the same betrayal every night. It is the strength to say, "I remember what happened, but I will not allow it to become the language of my soul." David had an opportunity to destroy Saul in the cave, but he understood that access to his enemy did not mean permission to become his enemy. He had the advantage, the opportunity, and every emotional reason to strike. Yet he honored God more than his impulse. That is the kind of maturity being formed in you. You are learning that having the power to respond does not mean every response is righteous. And this is where your story began to change. You stopped asking, "How can I make them understand what they did?" and slowly began asking, "What is this revealing about what God is building in me?" That question shifted you from victimhood into discernment. It did not erase the pain, but it gave the pain a place to go. Instead of allowing the wound to become a permanent address, you began turning it into wisdom. You learned that being misunderstood is not always a sign that you explained yourself poorly. Sometimes it is proof that people are committed to the version of you that benefits them. They did not want the truth, they wanted access to the old you. The version who overgave, over-explained, apologized for boundaries, and carried responsibility for everyone's comfort. When that version disappeared, they called it pride. When you stopped chasing their approval, they called it betrayal. When you became unavailable to manipulation, they called you difficult. But you were not betraying them. You were ending your agreement with the person you had become to survive them. You were no longer willing to purchase belonging with your peace. You were no longer offering pieces of your identity at the door, just so someone else would allow you to remain in the room. Stay with me, because what comes next is the part many people miss. The horrible situation did not only reveal their character, it revealed the place inside you that still believed rejection had to be corrected before you could move forward. It exposed the hidden hunger to be vindicated, not because you were vain, but because you had been carrying the exhaustion of being falsely seen. You had been trained to think peace meant everyone understood you. You thought healing would arrive when they apologized, when the false story was corrected, when the people who turned on you finally admitted that they had misjudged you. But God began teaching you that peace is not always the result of an explanation. Sometimes peace is the result of no longer needing one. Sometimes the door to peace opens when you stop standing outside another person's conscience, waiting for them to invite you into their understanding. That is a difficult freedom. It means you can walk away without receiving the confession you deserved. It means you can forgive without reopening the door. It means you can release the question of whether they will ever see you clearly. The man born blind in John chapter 9 did not spend his whole life trying to convince the Pharisees that he could now see. His transformation was real, even while they argued with it. He did not need their agreement to walk in his healing. And your healing does not become less real because someone refuses to acknowledge what you survived. Your testimony does not lose its power because the people who caused the wound deny the wound existed. A seed does not stop growing because the person who planted it never returns to see the harvest. Once you understood that, your response became different. You stopped responding from the wound and began responding from identity. You stopped trying to win every conversation and started protecting the assignment on your life. You realized that some people provoke you because they need you emotionally entangled with them. As long as you are defending yourself, they still have access to your attention. As long as you are proving your innocence, they still control the direction of your energy. So you became quiet. Not empty, not defeated, but intentional. Your silence became a sanctuary where God could restore your thoughts. It was not the silence of someone who had nothing to say. It was the silence of someone who finally understood that every reaction is an offering, and you no longer wanted to place your peace on the altar of someone else's confusion. Your silence was not surrender to their lies. It was refusal to let their disorder dictate your spirit. There are moments when silence is cowardice, and there are moments when silence is wisdom. Esther did not speak at every moment. She waited until the right room, the right timing, and the right question. Her power was not in constant reaction, it was in disciplined discernment. She understood that timing can turn a sentence into a scepter, and this leads us deeper. You began to see that the betrayal was not only about what they did to you, it was also about what you had tolerated because you were afraid of being alone. That realization may have hurt more than their actions. You discovered that you had ignored small warnings because you wanted the relationship to be what you hoped it was. You had translated disrespect into misunderstanding, inconsistency into busyness, and manipulation into someone's difficult season. You kept watering a tree that had been producing thorns, hoping that your patience would eventually make it bear fruit. You confused history with covenant and familiarity with safety. But the Most High was not punishing you by revealing the truth. He was rescuing you from an attachment that required you to keep abandoning yourself. Sometimes God answers the prayer for protection by showing you what you were previously too afraid to see. You gave them your discernment in exchange for belonging. You knew something was wrong, but you asked everyone else to confirm what your spirit had already recognized. You felt the atmosphere change, but you talked yourself out of what you sensed because you did not want to appear suspicious. You noticed the contradiction, but you kept offering explanations for people who never offered explanations for hurting you. That was not because you were foolish. It was because you had learned to distrust yourself whenever trusting yourself might disappoint someone else. You were so accustomed to preserving the relationship that you did not realize you were sacrificing your own inner witness to keep it alive. The wilderness season began breaking that pattern. It taught you that discernment is not the same as judgment. You do not have to condemn someone to acknowledge that they are unsafe for your future. You can love a person and still refuse to let their instability become your environment. Jesus served many, but he did not entrust himself to everyone. Compassion does not require the removal of boundaries. Even a river needs banks if it is going to carry life instead of becoming a flood. So you began honoring what you knew without needing permission. You stopped interrogating your intuition. You stopped calling every warning an attack from the enemy. You recognized that sometimes the divine protection you prayed for arrives as discomfort, distance, and the sudden exposure of motives. The closed door was not always rejection. Sometimes it was mercy wearing an unfamiliar face. Then something unexpected happened. The people who had turned against you began watching how you handled the aftermath. They expected bitterness. They expected public retaliation. They expected you to collapse because your collapse would have confirmed their story about you. But instead you kept moving. You rebuilt quietly. You continued serving. You became more measured, more focused, and less available to chaos. They were impressed not because you pretended it did not hurt, but because the pain did not receive the final authority over your character. They saw the calm, but they did not see the private battles behind it. They saw the boundary, but they did not see how many nights you prayed for the strength to maintain it. Joseph could have made his brothers pay when they stood before him with empty hands. He had the position, the power, and the evidence. But his maturity allowed him to distinguish between justice and vengeance. He did not deny the pit. He simply refused to let the pit become his permanent identity. The place where they buried him became the place from which God raised him. That is what people are beginning to recognize in you. You did not become powerful because nothing happened to you. You became powerful because what happened to you no longer gets to decide who you are. The betrayal may explain a chapter, but it does not own the pen. God is still writing. But let me challenge you with something. Do not turn their new admiration into your new addiction. This is where many people who survive rejection become trapped again. They spend so much time trying to be vindicated that when the crowd finally notices their strength, they begin performing strength for the crowd. They want the same people who dismissed them to applaud them. They want the ones who excluded them to request access. They want their enemies to become witnesses of their elevation. There is nothing wrong with being recognized, but recognition cannot become the new chain. If you need their amazement in order to believe you are chosen, then they still possess a piece of your identity. The applause of people who once abandoned you can feel like justice, but it can also become another form of bondage. The prodigal son returned to the father's house, not to make the older brother jealous. He returned because he had remembered where he belonged. Your restoration must be rooted in obedience, not in the desire to make those who hurt you regret their decision. Let God handle the evidence. Let your life become a witness without becoming a performance. You are not called to become successful merely so someone else feels small. You are not called to become healed so someone else feels guilty. You are not called to rise so that the people who rejected you can finally understand what they lost. Those things may happen, but they cannot be the foundation of your next season. The foundation is that God is teaching you to live from fullness rather than reaction. This is why your handling of the situation impressed people. You demonstrated something rare. You allowed consequences to speak without forcing them. The people who spread the story eventually had to live with the inconsistencies in it. The ones who abandoned you began experiencing the absence of what you used to provide. The atmosphere they created became the atmosphere they had to inhabit. You did not have to curse them. You did not have to chase their downfall. The seed carried its own harvest. Still, be careful not to confuse their consequences with your calling. Their discomfort is not your assignment. Their regret is not your reward. Your reward is becoming free enough that their reaction no longer determines your emotional weather. And here is where the story turns inward again. The final barrier was not their betrayal. It was your secret desire to remain morally superior because you had been hurt. You had every reason to be angry. You had evidence, memories, and people who could confirm what happened. But if you are honest, a part of you began to build an identity around being the one who endured what others could not understand. You began to carry the pain as proof that you were deeper than them, wiser than them, more loyal than them. That may sound spiritual, but it can become another prison. Pain can humble you, but it can also become an altar where you worship your own suffering. You could become so committed to the story of what they did that you do not notice when the story begins, demanding more of your future. But God is not only bringing you out of what happened, He is bringing you out of the identity you formed around what happened. The thing blocking you is not their opinion, not their betrayal, and not even the injustice itself. It is the belief that your future must somehow answer your past. It does not. You do not have to become extraordinary to prove they were wrong. You do not have to be endlessly strong to justify surviving. You do not have to make your life a courtroom where every achievement serves as evidence. You are allowed to succeed because you were called, not because you were rejected. You are allowed to rest because you are human, not because you have finally earned relief. You are allowed to be loved without making people pay for the ones who hurt you. That is the real breakthrough. When you stop building for revenge, you become available for purpose. When you stop rehearsing the betrayal, you can hear the instruction. When you stop waiting for them to validate your transformation, you can finally enjoy the transformation itself. The people who turned on you may one day speak well of you. They may try to return. They may suddenly remember your value when they need what only you carried. But let discernment govern the door. Forgiveness is not the same as restored access. Compassion is not the same as partnership. A changed atmosphere does not always mean a changed person. Nehemiah rebuilt the wall, but he also set a watch. He prayed, but he carried a weapon. He remained open to the work while refusing to be naive about opposition. Your next season requires both a tender heart and a guarded gate. Do not let what happened make you cruel. But do not let your desire to prove that you are still kind make you careless. You have learned to pause before answering. You have learned to observe patterns instead of promises. You have learned that consistency is louder than apology. You have learned to ask whether an invitation is aligned with your assignment or merely familiar to your wound. That is wisdom. That is growth. That is evidence that the horrible situation did not have the power to define you. It became a forge, and you came out carrying less resentment and more clarity. So if people are impressed by how you handled it, let them be. But do not hand them the credit for the work God did in secret. They saw the calm response. They did not see the nights you cried. They saw you walk away. They did not see how many times you wanted to turn back. Heaven saw all of it. And now you are entering a place where you do not need to explain every departure. You do not need to announce every boundary. You do not need to convince everyone that you are changing. The fruit will speak. The peace will speak. The new choices will speak. The life you build from a healed center will speak more clearly than any defense ever could. Place your hand on your heart and declare this with me. I release the need to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding me. I release the burden of proving my innocence, my value, and my calling. I forgive what I am ready to forgive, and I place what I cannot yet carry into the hands of God. I refuse to become cruel because I was wounded, and I refuse to become careless because I am compassionate. I trust the discernment being restored within me. I honor the doors God closes, the distance He creates, and the peace He gives. I will not build my future as revenge against my past. I will move forward free, clear, and whole. What happened to me will not define me. What God is forming in me will not define me. What God is forming in me will. If this message reached the place in you that has been quietly healing, do not force yourself to explain everything in the comments. Simply write, "I choose freedom," as a private declaration that you are no longer allowing betrayal to direct your life. And if someone you love is still trying to survive being misunderstood, share this with them, not to reopen their wound, but to remind them that their restraint was not weakness. Their healing is not invisible, and their future does not need permission from the people who walked away.